Hey folks, this is Glenn with the Cactus Atlas, and I'm here at the shores of the Colorado River at a historic crossing known as Lee's Ferry, and we're going to check out this beautiful landscape as well as some of the history attached to this area. So really excited about this one today. All right, so I've parked my car and I made my way down here to the Colorado River. Been really enjoying watching people play with their dogs in the river, watching boats launch on their river rafting excursions down to the Grand Canyon. This is one of the most popular spots, if not the only spot, I think, actually, where you can launch to make your way down into the Grand Canyon. So really interesting. And not only that, that's what today's use of this was for. It was very much used back in the day for a very similar purpose, for similar reasons. It's really difficult because I came out here with a plan to do kind of a documentary style episode on a massacre that occurred in Utah in the 1850s that's tied to the guy who this is named after, and we are going to touch on it. But now that I'm here, I think just Lee's Ferry and this region in general, do you see that fish just jump? This place is world renowned for brown trout fishing, and I think we just caught one. But anyway, nature's playing too well with me today with the horses and the reflections that I think we just need to give this place its due justice. We will touch on the history, and that's the main focus. But Lee's Ferry, you got my heart already. Yay, Glenn brought us to the Colorado River. We're gonna go rafting, we're gonna go swimming, we're gonna go fishing and hiking. No, we're not. We're gonna take a historic tour of old ruins of buildings. So knowing how strategic and important this river crossing is upstream, it's no surprise that one would find tons of history tied to this area. Imagine if you were a native living in this area hundreds of years ago, or pioneers like the Mormons that came into this area in the mid-1800s. How do you cross this? And especially as you get further downstream towards the Grand Canyon, it's just sheer cliff walls, thousands of feet to get out. There really are no safe crossings for hundreds of miles, and Lee's Ferry is a very important and strategic spot because it is so calm and you can cross. And I'm gonna guess these are baby rapids compared to what you would find deeper into the Grand Canyon. I think the Grand Canyon is quite a ways away from here, the Grand Canyon proper. I'm ignorant, I don't know where it officially starts. I think we're still in Glen Canyon, and then there's Marble Canyon. So probably further downstream is where the Grand Canyon officially begins. It's crazy to think too, like 150 years later, or approximately, today we're cruising down this river in inflatable boats that we could buy online, have delivered to our door. And back in the 1870s, Mr. Lee and his wife, or wives, I can't remember if he had multiple out here, settled this area and ran a ferry to get people to and fro, their horses on wagons, back and forth, ferrying people across. All right, last thing I want to see before we dive into the history, I'm gonna go see where the Paria runs into the Colorado, if we can get to it here on foot really quick. The thing that's of interest of the Paria River to me is not only is there like a cool 40-mile hike I think you can do, which we're not doing on this episode, but it's the site of where the early settlers, the early Mormon settlers, built a ranch and an orchard that still is here today. We're gonna see that. The next thing we're gonna do is this river walk that has some historical buildings, an old fort, and other things that I don't even know about yet. So we're gonna head upstream back to Lee's Ferry, say goodbye to the rapids, the cool breeze down here, and let's get into the study. All right, we're about to take a quick tour of the historic district of Lee's Ferry, and in modern times you see most folks park over here near the modern day boat launches. But if you turn this way and look down to this end of the parking lot, you'll notice what appear to be old historic buildings. And yes, sir, they are historic. And they're, one of them, if not both, are probably tied to one of this place's earliest settlers, Mr. Lee, who Lee's Ferry is named after. This first building is the old fort that was built back here, back in the 1870s. Out west here, you had a lot of tension between missionaries and the natives in this area, and it was during a time where the white man was really encroaching heavy out here on the west. So this building, this fort, was originally built just to secure the region. It wasn't really used, it sounds like, reading the signs, but it was really here just as a stronghold in case of times of stress or problems with local populations or other groups in the area. And believe me, the times preceding building up to the 1870s when this came to be were a really rough time out here. There was something known as the Utah Wars, which we'll talk a little bit about that on this episode later on when we get deeper into Mr. Lee's history. But it was a time of strife out here, strife between the Mormons, the US government, the natives of the area. Would have been a really scary time to live in, actually. You probably always had to have one eye looking over your shoulder. Out here in the Southwest, you see this kind of style a lot on old Puebloan ruins like Chaco Canyon or Aztec National Monument. And I wonder if the people here, when they built these kind of structures, borrowed from the natives' knowledge of the materials and building methods of the arid Southwest. And here's a picture of the American Placer Corporation office, and you have people standing outside it there with a sign that says Lee's Ferry, Arizona, U.S. Post Office, because around 1912, I think, cowboys, miners came into the area, and by 1922, they felt it was worthy of a post office. No mail was ever sent or delivered, according to the sign. This building, however, you can peek in the door a little bit. I figured that out. Right over here, we'll take a look. And what I observed and what reminded me of like old Puebloan ruins are, look at the walls. They look like they're just plastered, like something you would see at Chaco Canyon or Aztec. And then if you look up at the ceiling, doesn't that look just like one of those rooms you'd see at one of those places? Curious and cool. It's interesting to think, I mean, this building I've read has gone through multiple versions, probably being built on top of it over time, but are any of these things we see, the wood especially, did they repurpose any of that when they rebuilt or redesigned, or what, if anything, is original from Mr. Lee's time? All right, well, this is really cool. Exceeding expectations, the views, the river, the history. We got to get a little bit further down into the history before we get to the naughty side, or the alleged naughty side of Mr. Lee. All right, come take a trip with me down the historic river trail. We're gonna see and surmise where people cross the river with burros and wagons and old 1920s car in the old-time fashion ways. All right, we're proceeding now down a 1 mile long trail for which we will have to turn around and come back. It's the historic Lee's Ferry River Trail, and I think there's going to be interpretive signs, amazing views like that, and some historic relics, I hope. It's kind of interesting, the sounds of today and, you know, the equipment of today compared to maybe 150 years ago or so. You know, you would have seen burros and donkeys and wagons being ferried across here, one way across and back, not doing river rapid riding and all that. And now today, people just very casually in motorized craft make their way up the river, up the canyon. And I will be honest, if there was no history here today and this trail was here, I think we'd be doing a video anyway. These cliffs are huge, and this is heaven back here. It really is. Just look how the light bounces off of everything. Even at this time of the day, it's quite a spectacle. And then we're gonna look back this way towards the Vermilion Cliffs and the Colorado River, downstream where the rapids were earlier. At first I was gonna say, meh, kinda boring. These buildings were built in the 1950s. They were USGS, like for the US Geological Survey Office. here, and I was reading about it, and I was like, how boring, you know, this isn't from Mr. Lee's time, but it's still cool, it's history. But it's kind of neat because what these people were here to do was to measure the river flow to make sure that there was proper water sharing between the neighboring states. The reason why I think that's interesting is even today in the news, because of the very low levels that you'll see at Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam and unprecedented droughts, there's a lot of conversations going on about right now. Even where I live in Phoenix, they're cutting back water on entire communities, and you're starting to see a really interesting time starting to form where too many people really moved into an area that wasn't naturally meant to support people on that scale. And now the droughts are really starting to make their presence be felt. We're standing amidst an old area where some guy named Spencer, Charles H. Spencer, had a gold mining site here. This rendition shows you how they were using the Colorado River to get water to blast the hills and blow things up with dynamite. And there was a whole steam engine that powered that you could see right there in this picture. And the cool thing is, I think the steam engine is right there, still today. Apparently the mining effort out here didn't really turn up what he was looking for. No gold, they hit rock really quickly and just abandoned the effort. But still, it's really neat to think, you know, to see a glimpse into that. I guess everybody has to come out and give it a try, and some fail, some don't fail. The sign here says until about 1899, most people crossed the river down by the modern day boat dock. So that answers one of my questions that I had, because I wasn't sure. I didn't know if the historical crossing was somewhere else, but this makes it sound like that, right? Until 1899, many pioneers crossed the river near the present day boat dock, necessitating a harrowing wagon ride either up or down the unforgiving rock ledge known as Lee's Backbone. Okay, so I think they're saying, they're really talking about maybe that rocky ledge right there that's angled up, which would look different from a different angle, I think. I wonder if that's what they mean. So did they change the crossing at some point to make that easier? I'm not sure what that sign is getting at. I think I see something else down in the water there that's riveted. It's like a big steel riveted thing. Almost looks like another boiler of some sort. Big tank, and there's a sign right here. How neat is this? That thing I just saw is the remnant of an old steamboat built by this guy Spencer, launched 2 years after I think he came out here, so 1912. That thing down there is maybe the only remaining piece of what that was. So the steamboat was basically a failed experiment, and the problem was Spencer's investors thought it would be cheaper to haul materials back and forth using a steamboat on the Colorado than it would be to have a mule train. Unfortunately, the steamboat proved too costly. It burned through coal like nobody's business, and after a couple runs, they just left it there on the shore to rot. And it would have been quite a sight to see a steamship with a paddle on it, like back in the day, just parked there in this landscape. Almost doesn't go together, but it does. Wildlife sighting, folks. Bighorn sheep. And a baby one, I think. So the baby's eating some of that green, lush green stuff that's probably grown with all the monsoon rains this year. So right here beyond the sign at the end of this trail, the historic trail, which we've reached officially, folks, are the ruins of the Johnson Cabin. This was a place built back in 1913 and 14 in the winter to really house travelers that were gonna cross the river here. And by the way, the site over here, as another sign indicates, became the crossing starting in 1899 because they put a cable pulled version of this thing that would pull people across the river, across to the other side, where you can actually still see stone structures dotting the shore. That would have been the other side where the ferry crossed. And all that remains of that little cabin. I don't know if this is the total size of it or just a part of it. I guess if you're just staying overnight, waiting to cross the ferry the next morning or something, I mean, what do you really need, you know? Probably would have done the trick. It's just so neat to think I'm standing in a structure that travelers almost into the 1900s, 1899 and on, would have laid their heads to rest here, right where I'm standing. Fascinating. And you get a good look at that mile we walked. I could see the current day boat launch area. That looks about a mile to me. So we're gonna cruise on back and we're gonna dig into Mr. Lee's history a little bit now. All right, we've arrived at Lonely Dell Ranch Historic District. So what we're gonna see here is back in the 1860s, one of the members of the Mormons came through this area and mentioned to the leadership of the time that they should build a ranch down here because of the close river crossing. So that's where Lonely Dell Ranch came in. Lee was one of the people ordered to come down here with his family to be a homesteader on a ranch in this area. Oh, look at this. So I guess the orchard isn't really from the original settlers. It's probably from 1965, but it's still privately maintained. And they have quite a selection of different types of trees here. Almonds, apples, apricots, figs, nectarines, peaches, pears, plums, and quince. What the heck is quince? I've never heard of that. And like the sign said, folks, the fruit is free for the picking. I do see some trees with some, what may be peaches actually. I think peaches are a late summer fruit, are they not? Maybe they're in season. I'll tell you what is in season right now is that shade in there in the orchard, which I'm about to enjoy immensely. But first thing, there's another sign over here. I'm gonna see if there's more information about this. Speak of the guy, John D. Lee and his wife, Emma Batchelor Lee. They established this place, I guess, in 1872, according to this. And they established their lives and made a living as being ferry operators. So this is Mr. Lee of the namesake Lee's Ferry. And these are the remnants of his ranch. Okay, so now we're gonna get into maybe a little bit of the darker side of Lee's Ferry. So yeah, this is the remaining ranch and grounds from 1872. When this Mormon pioneer came down, I'm sure from the north in Utah, to settle this at the orders of leadership, probably Brigham Young and other church leaders of the time. Lee had a very close connection to Brigham Young actually throughout the years and a close relationship at times. But there's a really dark side of the history to Mr. Lee that we keep alluding to. But before we do that, I just want to look at this from the perspective of, hey, you came out here as a pioneer with nothing established and you made this with your own hands and eked out an existence here and then started a ferry business. I mean, that's respectable, I think. I don't see a sign in front of this wagon, and although unlikely because this place probably traded hands, I think basically Mrs. Lee was here till 1879. Mr. Lee had perished years before, and this would have changed hands. So it's hard to say if this would have been a relic of the Lees and a piece of Utah Mormon history or a later owner. This is probably some kind of recreation of a period garden or vegetable garden or something. Said they grew alfalfa and produced hay in an area not far from here. So that was one of the products that they apparently grew. But now, yeah, you're starting to see really well-preserved structures. Certainly a little renovation on them, understandable, but still I love this stuff. Let's see what we got. So the first sign I'm finding is actually a cabin from 1886. Which is after the time of the Lees, but still the guy here had a connection. This is Warren Johnson, who would have ran the ferry after Mr. Lee's death in the 1870s, I believe. 1874 is what's sticking out on my mind. I'm such a bad person to remember facts, but Mr. Warren is part of the history here of Lee's Ferry. Regardless, this cabin is amazing. The roof certainly looks not original, but the sides, the wood, the mud, you can see, anything around a roof looks like it's been redone, but this does look totally original to me. There is a welcome mat, so the question is, are we welcome inside? I don't think we are. There's it's locked up, so that's too bad, but understandable. There is an old oven here, which is pretty neat. This is pretty neat. This is an 1878 root cellar. So if this was built in 1878, it's probably around the very end of when Emma was living out here. So probably Mr. Warren, I'm guessing, would have done that. But if they would have canned, you know, their fruit, vegetables, things like that, they would have stored them in here. And let's go check it out. Hopefully there's no snakes in here. They do have warnings about watching out for rattlesnakes, so. Oh, it smells kind of funky in here too. Very dank. And kind of earthy. Actually, it's not a bad smell. Back here, it just smells old, like that old wood. You got these old shelves, probably original shelves where they would have stored their canned goods. I'm not quite sure what this is. This is a more modern looking structure. It's got electricity, I can see, and running water. So maybe it's just here to serve. Actually, there's a sign. Ah, yeah, this is not from the same period we've been looking at. This is the 1936 Weaver House. So apparently I'm guessing these people ended up becoming the owners of this land, you know, post 1800s. So this would have been their house. This is a beautiful home, by the way, very sizable home. So I assume there was a little bit of wealth there in the Weaver household to build something like this. If anything, if you have no regard for history or whatever, make note of this place, because if you're picnicking or hanging out down in Lee's Ferry proper, look at how much shade and picnic tables and stuff you have in here. And the orchard with free fruit to pick. Actually, this house is an interesting one with a little bit of ties to these folks too. This is called the 1925 Polygamist Cabin. So this would have been a son, Jerry Johnson, of Warren Johnson, who was the second ferryman after the original Lee, of course. And this guy wanted to continue their polygamous traditions out here, so he built this in 1925. So they were practicing polygamy out here well into the 1900s. Okay, here's some more information that explains a few things of really why did we not see more from the Lee's time. Apparently, the last remaining structure on this ranch was Emma Lee's cabin, which would have been here. They tore it down and then they rebuilt the 1886 Warren Johnson family home. Warren and his large family with multiple wives, and that would be here, but it was destroyed by a kitchen fire in 1926. But that also probably explains that cellar. I think Mrs. Lee had moved on at that point. But it makes sense why the cellar is there, because it's right next to the home. Okay, so basically quince is related to apples and pears, so I don't see any on here. The fruit is ripe when golden yellow and the fuzz will fall off. So quince, too bad. I would have liked to tried quince. You want to see what baby apples look like? Hi, baby apples. There you go. So not ripe, not ready to eat by any means. And yeah, so these would be pear trees. Trying to see if I could find a ripe one. I mean, there are some that might be close, but they're getting there. Every once in a while I snap back to reality and I realize I'm in an orchard by myself next to a historic ranch. In this terrain with these red cliffs all around me. It's like unreal. It doesn't make sense almost. The dry brittleness of the cliffs and the lushness of this orchard. It shouldn't exist, but it does. I almost want to just pluck one of these things and bite into it anyway and just taste it. But I'm just afraid it just would be wasteful, you know, just wasting something that's not ready. So that's why I'm not gonna do it. Doesn't seem right. Just to taste something that probably doesn't taste good right now anyway and throw it away. So let's head back this a ways before we part ways with the lonely Dell. As for the Lee's Ferry portion of this episode, we covered a lot of ground and we saw a lot and scoured this place, but there's a little bonus feature now. The dark side of Lee's Ferry, we'll call it. The history around that. And for that, we're gonna do a little bit more traveling, see a few more historic things along the way to uncover that tale. Hey friends, you've been transported to the future, my future. We're right now several hours away from Lee's Ferry, and we're right north of St. George, Utah, heading to a place that Mr. Lee is very connected to. So the years building up to Lee's arrival in Lee's Ferry started in this place in the 1850s. He inhabited this area along with other of his brothers of the Latter-day Saints Church, and it was a very tender time, to say the least, a very on-edge time, with the Mormons almost taking a last stand approach to defend their way of life out here in the Utah territory from the encroaching federal government in what was known as the Utah War. That's the context for everything that I'm about to tell you that happened next. I don't know if there's really any proven direct ties to Brigham Young or the leaders of the church. I know they denied it, but some of the Mormons in this area either took it upon themselves or did it at direct order to massacre a traveling wagon train of people from Arkansas. 140 women, children, men. After a 5-day standoff and truce flags being waved when supplies were running out, they were all rounded up and massacred. Just think of some of them being shot in the head point blank, with their bodies left to rot in the sun. One of the reasons they say the white flags had to go up because the settlers were giving up was they ran out of water and they couldn't get to a nearby water source without getting shot or picked off. But imagine being out in this kind of heat for like 5 days and your water's running out. I mean, there's nothing you can do. And just think you've got crying women, children, probably infants in the mix. Some of the children, by the way, are said to have been any of them under like 7-ish or less that they say wouldn't remember. They didn't. The Indians and the Mormons did not execute. So I guess there were a few that survived, but that's not saying much, because still children, as we would consider them today, were certainly murdered, and probably other stuff I don't even want to think about. Anyway, as you may have guessed it, Mr. Lee was pinned as one of the ringleaders here, and I think just to kind of get away now, you might understand a little bit more why Mr. Lee wanted to head down where he did in northern Arizona, to maybe hide out for a few years until emotions cooled down. And keep in mind too, the Mormons were not looked kindly upon by a lot of people in society in that time. But it all would catch up with Mr. Lee, and when it did, it was not a good ending for him. He was eventually executed by a firing squad, and you actually could see pictures of him sitting on what might even be his own coffin, like in the minutes leading up to his execution. And I've heard testimony that he sobbed and cried and said that he tried to deter people from doing that. And who knows? I'm not here to judge or do anything like that. I'm just here to try to draw that line for you in a very simple way, that Mr. Lee was executed for that crime eventually. It all caught up to him. And what we're really seeking out now are these sites where they say that some of the bones have been laid to rest, as well as the sites where the travelers camped and a couple other things. So I'll catch up with you up the road there. Okay, so we are actually at the Overlook Massacre site here, and there you can see there's a whole section here. But I wanted to start here just so we can kind of get an overlook at where things happened. But here's really a good recounting, and maybe one thing that I got wrong was that it sounds like the Mormons waved a truce flag almost to trick them from coming out of hiding, but I did read they were running out of supplies, and they would have. It makes sense. But basically they rounded up the men and older boys in one group, and then like women and children in other groups, and started marching them, and then some really bad things happened. I wish you could be with me to smell the pine smell and feel the breeze and slight humidity and 94 degrees. That's hot. And just to think, are these the smells and what these people felt in their last days? It very likely was. Here's a wall in the memorial that lists, I think, 120 names approximately in memoriam of the immigrants that died here. And it even shows their ages. These people were mostly well known to their families, so they had some information, but you know, not every family was well known, so you could see there is some uncertainty, but you could see here's Emberson Milam, 4 years old. John Calvin, 6 years old. Sarah Francis, 3 years old. Martha Elizabeth, 5. And these look like they're probably the older ones, but the names in the list is long. You know, when you read, I guess, about something and just like you're reading a Stephen King novel or any novel, you always paint a picture in your mind of what something would look like, what you imagine it would look like and feel like. And this really fits like what I had in mind. But when you imagine and you play the events in your mind of how people would have been dressed and just the humanity of it, maybe observing it from up here on this hilltop, it's one of those things, it's gut-wrenching, you know? I really didn't think I'd feel much emotion about it. I kind of look at things from more of just a objective context, emotionless, but this one's kind of like, ugh, it's giving me the heebie-jeebies. So you can see there's another memorial way down there. See cars parked at it. And this will line you up where the immigrant campsite is. So I believe it's right behind that memorial. There's a group of trees off in the distance. If there are trails and we can walk back there, I will, because that's the most likely place I would think, because they wouldn't have camped on a hill. They would have camped on flat ground. So we'll check that out. So this should be the site where there are remains. And the sign up here will probably tell us a little bit about that. So yeah, I was just catching up here on the actual history. So in 1859, like I think I said, a member of the US Army, some attachment was out here and ordered to help clean up and bury some bones a couple years later. And this is the site of the scene in that book I'm reading where you would have seen human hair and pieces of clothing just stuck in the sagebrush and grass. And then bleached white bones, no flesh really left. So they gathered up, I think, about the remains of 24 people, and he originally buried them here. And there was a different monument that was about 50 feet wide and 12 feet high, and this is supposed to represent what it would have looked like. There's a lot of vandalism and stuff over the years, so they had the Mormon church helped build, and they maintain this now, and it's absolutely beautiful. But in the excavation of this, I think they found an additional 20 some odd, 29 or something like that, more bones that they interred in this site also. So I don't think that accounts for everybody, but who knows? I'm sure wild animals picked off stuff. The Indians probably took people away. Actually, I think I was right. My waypoint was correct. It looks like we have a short trail to the actual siege memorial. So this is just where the bones were buried. The siege memorial where the siege happened, which is really where things are going to get visceral, is up this trail a short ways. I think I even see it. So back here is the area marked as the actual siege site. So if I'm interpreting this all correctly, back on September of 1857, a small wagon train would have circled around in this area. They would have dug a defensive trench somewhere in here where they could have riflemen positioned. They dug underneath the wheels of the wagons so the wheels would sink and create cover from bullets, incoming fire. The way a plaque over there reads, after they dug in here, it would have been 5 days of hell. A lot of people, there were 7 people, I think, shot. Right at the beginning, I think, or near the beginning, some people were shot and killed. And I think throughout that 5 days, there may have been a couple other ones. Because at times, the people had to run out and seek out water. So some of the brave people would run out to a nearby water source. I'm wondering if it's that ditch over there somewhere. There's a spring nearby. And I think some were picked off, some of them made it. But the scene here would have been just a nightmare. You'd hear a mixture of gunfire, probably animals suffering, women crying, children sobbing, men sobbing. Man. What a way to tie this all together. This sign is talking about how In 1874, federal authorities indicted 9 Mormon men, and out of everybody that was under suspicion, only one was captured, and that was Mr. John Doyle Lee, our friend that created today's beautiful Lee's Ferry. And on March 23rd of 1877, about 20 years after the massacre that happened on these grounds, officials took Lee back right here and not far from this sign. He was executed by firing squad. So the next time you're at Lee's Ferry about to enjoy the beautiful Glen Canyon recreation area, think of where the place got its name. See you next time.